Good morning. My name is Carol Rowan, and I have the pleasure and honor of being your worship associate this morning. Before I forget, if you haven't already silenced your cell phones, please do it now. We welcome everyone here and online to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Roanoke, with a special welcome for those who are joining us for the first time. We hope you stay after the service for coffee and fellowship in the fellowship hall that's right back there. Now, if you'll turn around, if you're here, and connect with everyone watching at home. For those of you online who wish to share your joys and concerns during the Lifelines portion of the service, please put them in the chat during the next 15 minutes. Our minister is the Reverend Jen Raffensperger. While she's out of the pulpit today, our service will be led by Charlie Grimes, and his sermon is entitled, "Who was here first, and how does that matter?" So please join me in reciting our words of welcome. Whoever you are, whomever you love, however you express your identity, whatever your situation in life, whatever your experience of the holy, as you come seeking love, your presence here is a gift. Whether you're filled with sadness, overflowing with joy, needing to be alone with yourself, or eager to engage with others, all who welcome all are welcome here. And our covenant, we commit to supporting each other with respect and direct communication as we work in community to explore spiritual growth and to be a force for good in the world.
So this morning's opening song, Wende Aho, is a Cherokee morning song. It roughly means, I am of the Great Spirit. So we're going to sing it in the right key. I'm going to find the right key. And then I'm going to teach it to you. And there are a couple choir members who've done this before. You may have heard it before, and you can sing back what you can. Wende Aho, Wende Aho, Wende ya, Wende ya, ho 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 ho, hey ya ho, ya ya ya. Wende ya ho, Wende ya ho, Wende ya, Wende ya, ho 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 ho, hey ya ho, ya ya ya. So we'll now do a call and response. Wende ya ho, Wende ya ho, Wende ya ho, Wende ya ho, Wende ya, Wende ya, Wende ya, ho 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 ho, hey ya ho, ya ya ya. Now we're going to sing it together. Just do your best. Do your best. One learn. Ready? One. Wende ya ho, Wende ya ho, Wende ya, Wende ya, ho 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 ho, hey ya ho, ya ya ya. Wende ya ho, one more time. Wendeyaho, Wendeyaho, Wendeya, Wendeya, ho, 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 hey ya ho, ya, ya, ya.
Our opening words today are from a 2015 sermon by Reverend Dr. Jan Carlson Bull. What was, was. We cannot change the number of days, nor can we change the events that happened. We can, though, choose to remember, to celebrate, solemnize, recognize. And our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that our church resides on the traditional lands of the Tutelo and Monacan nations and was later farmed and developed through slave labor. We recognize and respect the ongoing connection to this land by generations of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. May our gratitude and fellowship echo here and honor that rich history. And now we light our chalice, a symbol of the Unitarian Universalist faith.
May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our powers to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse, to serve you, O Spirit of life.
Hey there, my name is Jessie. I use they, them pronouns, and I am the Director of Lifespan Faith Development here at UUCR. I want to invite up all my young friends. Some are already making their way up here. Also, if you want to get close and listen to the story, that's an option too. So I have a story to tell you about a house that I lived in when I was very, very young. And this was a very old house, they told me. I mean, I didn't know how old was, right? When you're 4 or 5 years old, 16 is really old, isn't it? Is 16 really that old? No. So this was a big old house. And one day, my brother was skateboarding inside. Yeah, was that a smart choice? Yeah, no. Not really. And he fell off of his skateboard, and his skateboard went wham right into a wall. What do you think happened to the wall? It broke. And the stuff on the wall, called plaster, it was an old house, the plaster started coming off. And it was a problem. Of course, my brother got in a little bit of trouble, because are you supposed to skateboard inside? No. And he didn't hurt himself. He was okay, but the wall was not okay. And that plaster kept coming off. And behind that plaster was a bunch of, what do you think was behind the plaster? Oh, I wish it was treasure. We can dream, can't we? Building materials. But it didn't look like anything I had ever seen before. It was these pieces of wood that went straight across, and there was stuff behind the wood that looked like the stuff that would come out of a stuffed animal. Yeah, and straw and stuff. And then when they came to fix it, they had to take all of that stuff out. And guess what else was behind that plaster? Not mice. I kind of wish it was mice. A bunch of bees. I like all these like nature things. It was nothing like that. It was a bunch of paper. Not very interesting, right? Until we pulled it out. And this paper had dates from a long, long time ago. And some of the articles in the paper were about hurricanes that had hit. I'm from Galveston, Texas, and we get a lot of hurricanes down there. And some of the articles were about hurricanes that had hit the island a long, long time ago. And this house had survived. And those papers just kind of ended up back there. You know what else we found? He hit a wall that was on the other side of the bathroom. We found a pile about this big of razor blades. It's a weird wall. It is. So a long time ago in the medicine cabinet, there was a place where you could throw away. We didn't throw away the whole razor. People would take the blade off and throw it away by sticking it in this hole in the medicine cabinet. So it doesn't hurt anybody. Nobody gets hurt. It just stays in the wall forever until a bunch of kids find it. But we also found the things that people collected. We found little bottles, like little medicine bottles. We found all kinds of things between these two walls. It was like treasure. So you were right. It was treasure. It might not be everybody's treasure. It wasn't, we couldn't sell those razor blades and get a bunch of money, right? But it was somebody's story. It was the story of somebody who shaved and shaved and shaved and shaved. It was the story of somebody who read those newspapers because their house survived a hurricane, but maybe their neighbors didn't. It was the medicine that they took. It was the things that they drank that was in those bottles. It was marbles. Somebody played with those marbles. Now, this house was built in the 1800s, which, when you think about it, in the big, big span of time, might not have been that long ago. So when we walk on this earth, at least 7 generations from now, what we do here, people will know. And we're about to go play a game that tracks over 7 generations of the people that were here before we moved here, the people that didn't even have razor blades. So there's always a story behind the wall if you look. But don't look the same way my brother did, because you also might get in trouble. You guys ready to go play the game? Let's do it.
Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the light of Lord surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go.
Let me tell you about our speaker today. Charlie Grimes was a federal bureaucrat with the Department of the Interior for 32 years. He started working as a ranger for the National Park Service in the Ozarks of Missouri, spent 4 years in southern Oregon with the Bureau of Land Management on the Rogue National Wild and Scenic River, then made the mistake of taking a job in Washington, D.C., so he could deal with the wacky people sending those incomprehensible memos from headquarters to the field stations. He soon sank into the mire, produced budgets using math known only to federal bureaucrats, and became a part of the headquarters problem for the rest of his career. His last project was creating the recreation.gov website. On the side, he started teaching geography of Virginia at George Mason University as one of the many adjuncts there, and developed the virginiaplaces.org website. Now in retirement, he is actively involved with different conservation and smart growth groups in Prince William County, and he pesters elected and appointed officials on a regular basis. Cheryl.
So I'm descended from the elite first families of Virginia, the FFVs that you may have learned about back in the elementary school. My oldest colonial ancestor got here around 1643. I'm the 10th generation. One of my relatives, known in our family as the Lowland Beauty, turned down George Washington because he wasn't good enough. She went off and married a rich guy, and his plantation is now Lee Sylvania State Park. So I was raised with the idea that my family's special because we were here first. But who really got here first? course, we all learned in school that the Jamestown settlers who got here in 1607 are the first people in Virginia. What I wasn't taught in school is that the Spanish actually got here as the first colonist of Virginia. Hernando de Soto, he came through from Florida up into North Carolina. He got to Asheville, North Carolina around 1540. And another Spanish explorer, Juan Pardo, he got near the same area, but he sent a group all the way up into what's now Virginia, to Saltville, Virginia, around 1647. So if we really want to celebrate our colonial heritage, we should all be speaking Spanish. If you want to recognize the very, very first families of Virginia, though, you got to go back over 20,000 years ago. These people came from Asia. They came across what is now the Bering Strait, speaking a language that is a predecessor to modern Chinese. And those people had spent thousands of years in Beringia, what is now Siberia, Alaska, and underneath the Bering Strait today. And maybe there were 10,000 people there back when there were sea levels 400 feet lower. Virginia was a lot bigger back then. There were ice sheets. They blocked the passage coming from the north to the south. I bet some people tried to walk across those ice sheets. There were people who were hungry and they saw the birds coming from the south, so they were looking for the birds. But I bet you there were some adventurers too. You know the type. Here, hold my beer. Watch this. Somebody went around the ice sheet. They got in kayaks and they boated around the ice sheet. They paddled south. So maybe 1,000 people were in that founder population. About 1,000 people. That's affected the genetics of Native Americans even today. Very small group of people. They followed the kelp highway. They fed on the seals. They fed on the fish as they paddled around the ice. And later, about 12 to 13,000 years ago, an ice sheet melted back, the Cordilleran and the Laurentian ice sheets melted back, and there became an ice-free corridor between the Rocky Mountains. And people got to walk here coming south. The footprints. We found those in New Mexico several years ago. They're 23,000 years old. That blew up all of our assumptions about when did the first people get south of the ice sheets. We know now they were kayakers, not hikers. And those immigrants, they were the first geologists. They were the first people to find out where were the rocks that made the best tools. They were the first botanists. They were the people who found out where's the food that's safe to eat and where's the stuff that's poisonous. And I've always assumed that in order to find the poisonous plants, you grab some guy from the other tribe and you make him eat it. And then you say, if Mikey likes it, then you get to eat it, and otherwise you don't eat it yourself. They were the first wildlife ecologists. They figured out where the bears spent the winter. They figured out where the animals migrated. And they were the first meteorologists. If you wanted to know how far you could travel before the storm hit, you had to read the sky. They were the first scientists that we had here. They were fast-moving explorers. They didn't just sit there on the coastline. They got all the way, at least 14,000 years ago, they got all the way to the tip of Chile. And as other explorers would be described later, they would boldly go where no man has gone before. But I got to interrupt myself. I'm telling you the science story. I'm telling you what the anthropologist and the archaeologist and the geologist understand to be the tale. But many Native American cultures have their own story, and it's a different tale. Those Paleo-Indians, the group that we call the first arrivals, they really didn't spend a lot of time hunting for food. Maybe 4 or 8 hours a day is all that it took. They had a lot of downtime. No TV, no internet, no cell phones. So what do you do when you've got that downtime? You tell stories around the campfire. And in some Native American cultures, the answer to the question, where did we come from, is, we've always been here. We didn't come from anywhere. We're here. We belong here. This is our land. No one wrote down those first tales, But I will bet they pose the same existential questions that we ask today. Where did I come from? Where am I going? And of course, what am I doing while I'm here? For 20,000 years, I will bet you that religious education classes across this area were just as diverse as what we're seeing today in Roanoke, Virginia. There's a wide range of Native Americans who spread across this continent with a wide range of perspectives, a wide range of religious and spiritual beliefs, and a lot of different ways to go hunt that food. If you had those different beliefs, you had differences of opinion. And so the children got taught different stories. All right, back to the science. First people to get to North America. They're immigrants. They're Asian immigrants. They're hunters and they're gatherers. They're looking for food and shelter every day, sitting around the campfire at night, telling stories, speculating about what's across the next ridge. And they're traveling in small, closely related family groups. That's at least our presumption from looking backwards and studying other societies today. And we think that everybody did everything. When I was in school, I got taught gender differences. Men hunted, women gathered. Not evidence to that. That's a perspective we brought to the story. The evidence is that there was a small group of people and nobody got to slack. Everybody got to participate in doing all the work. That original migration from Beringia, that could have been just an exercise of self-survival. Again, their religious beliefs back in this culture. 10,000 people in Beringia, they might have all been Unitarians, which means there were 12,000 different perspectives. But there were probably some really strong differences between where should we go, what should we do, and how did we get here, and what are we doing while we're here? And there may well have been those religious differences that led to conflict. So the first people that got in a kayak and boated around that ice sheet might have been actually escaping to save their lives. They might have been fleeing the dominant religious culture that didn't accept them with their perspective. We think that's how people left Samoa and got in boats and ended up at Easter Island in Hawaii. They weren't traveling for the fun of it. That was a dangerous journey. Something drove them to get in those boats. And it may well have been flee for their lives because they disagreed with the other folk. Now, if you're thinking all is peace and harmony in Native American society, if that's what you see when you watch the cartoons and watch the advertisements and you see the Native American with the tear down his cheek, and it's only when the Europeans arrived, think again. The Shannon Archaeological Site, it's upstream on the Roanoke River. It's now covered by Blacksburg Country Club. We excavated, fortunately it got excavated, a lot of information was gathered from the site before it became a golf course, and it had a palisade, a wall. We can tell from the organic dirt surrounded by all the natural clay that somebody stuck a bunch of poles in the ground. That means 500 years ago, people chipped rock and used that chipped rock to cut down trees. Now, I dare you to cut down a tree with a chipped rock. That's hard work. But somebody did that hard work for a reason. They built that palisade. You can go to Natural Bridge State Park, and you can see a Monacan recreation of a palisade in a town. Somebody built that palisade with all that extra effort for a reason. And that's because there were bad guys out there. There wasn't everybody going, hi, hi, hey, hey, let's sing together and be happy. There was no kumbaya amongst all the different groups. There was conflict, there was fighting, and there were defense mechanisms in order to protect themselves. Native Americans were normal. They ate, they played, they talked, and they fought, just like humans today. Europeans are not the very first people to displace the Native Americans from one place to another. If you ever get to Smith Mountain Lake, you can see a site downstream at Leesville that's being excavated when the water is low, and we're finding there rock from Tennessee. So we know that people gathered together even before they had villages and towns. We didn't really settle into towns until agriculture developed a couple of 4,000 or 3,000 years ago. But even before there were villages, it took a village to raise a society. So Native Americans from Tennessee area would come up to Smith Mountain. That gap in the mountain was a pretty good place for everybody to agree to meet. They may have met here where the Roanoke River cuts through. And they looked at each other and they said, I'll trade you this shell from the Atlantic in exchange for that funny looking rock that you brought here from Tennessee. And then, of course, they also exchanged young children or older children, because even back then everyone knew it wasn't really good to marry your sister. So this is where people met. This is where people gathered in community. So last month, Betsy told you the story of Native American cultures and Native American nations who were here when the European colonists arrived. Go back even earlier, though, and those Spanish who got here in the 1500s, they really broke up Native American society. So what the Europeans discovered in the 16 and the 1700s might actually be a reflection of a disrupted community from the 1500s. So when De Soto, Pardo, and other Spanish came marching through the southeast, they couldn't be stopped by the political leaders, they couldn't be stopped by the military leaders, they couldn't be stopped by the religious leaders. So what do you think the folks thought of their political leaders, their military leaders, and their religious leaders? If you can't protect me, why am I giving you a status, prestige, and a position of authority? We think, at least I think, that Native American societies were rearranged, that what we know as tribal groups today were established perhaps in response to the disruption of the Spanish. And we know, for example, the Powhatan paramount chiefdom that the Jamestown colonists discovered in 1607, that dated only back to around the 1580s when Powhatan's dad organized 6 tribes. By the time the English got there, there were 30 tribes, probably gathered in order to protect themselves, anticipating something like the Spanish sailing up the river that was Powhatan's River until the English renamed it the James River. So that our society, the societies that Betsy talked about in the 1700s that were here in the 1600s when Batts and Fallam first marched into this area, they might not have been here in the 1400s. Might have been a very different group of people with a very different name. So in the 1700s, as Betsy told you, the Tutelo and the Saponi lived here along the Roanoke River, and they were caught between the Cherokee down in along the Blue Ridge south of here, the Catawba to the east of them. Up north were the Monacan and the Manahoacs, north of the Monacan, up in the Rappahannock River, up where I am in Prince William County. And they engaged with raids back and forth, and especially further north with the Iroquois who lived along the St. Lawrence River. And so in addition to the disruption of the Spanish, people trying to live in peace and harmony here on the Roanoke River ended up with these raiding parties marching through as the Iroquois came down. This and our next couple of months was a good time to go south and earn your spurs as a warrior if you're a member of the Haudenosaunee tribes, the Iroquois tribes, or if you're a member of the tribes to the south, you would march north to attack the Iroquois. And so if you lived here, you ended up being an unhappy victim of folks marching through, which made it really tough for you to settle in this area. So they packed up and they left. And in the early 1700s, the Tutelo that were here, the Saponi that were here, they end up down on what's now the Carr Reservoir, down closer to I-95. Then they get displaced from there. They end up in Pennsylvania, New York, and they finally end up in Canada. A few are left remaining. There's a state-recognized tribe in North Carolina of Saponi near I-95. So that's the science story of the moment. We'll come back and talk about what do we do with that in just a minute.
In 1781, Thomas Jefferson responded in Notes on the State of Virginia to a series of questions posed by a French diplomat. His response to one of the questions about Native Americans, referred to by Jefferson as Aborigines, included the following. When the first effectual settlement of our colony was made, which was in 1607, the country from the seacoast to the mountains, and from Potomac to the most southern waters of James River, was occupied by upwards of 40 different tribes of Indians. Those between the falls of the rivers and the mountains were divided into two confederacies, the tribes inhabiting the headwaters of the Potomac and Rappahannock being attached to the Manahoacs, and those on the upper parts of the James River to the Monacans. But the Monacans and their friends were in amity with the Manahoacs and their friends, and waged joint and perpetual war against the Powhatans.
When I was teaching school, the students would always want to know what's going to be on, when I was teaching school, the students would want to know what's going to be on the quiz. You would stamp your left foot, and that was the clue for them to know that was going to be on the quiz. None of this that we've told you up to now is going to be on the quiz. The challenge is, how do you utilize what you've learned? How do you put to work what you know? It isn't necessarily important that you can pronounce Manahoac or Monacan or Tudeloassaponi. We really don't know a lot of how these people did talk to each other. But we do know that they were here before we were here. What I'm trying to add to your background and understanding is that before the Monacans and the others were here, other people were here. They were not the first either, all the way back to 20-some thousand years ago. The oldest evidence we have of people in Virginia is actually about 18,000 years. We don't have footprints dating 23,000 years. But we know that long before there were towns on the Roanoke River, there were hunters and gatherers marching through here, exploring this territory, laying claim to turf, and probably disputing with each other as well as getting together to trade. So when we want to acknowledge the heritage of the past, when we want to acknowledge the behavior of our ancestors, it helps to have a good understanding of who was actually here first, and how did they disappear, and how did other people affect them before the last group got kicked out by the European colonists. Now, my relatives, they were slave owners. I have to deal with the fact that if you go back 10 generations, the rich guys 10 generations ago, 8 generations ago, 6 generations ago, their behavior doesn't match what I consider to be presently socially acceptable. For that matter, my parents' behavior didn't match what I consider socially acceptable, and I didn't engage in behavior that they thought was socially acceptable. But we're Unitarian Universalists. We make our own choices. We decide what's right. We decide what's appropriate. And we challenge ourselves to discover, how do we respond to what we know? So as we gain knowledge and as we gain perspective, be it in genetics and the study of medical choices that we may face, or whether it's in history and we deal with who was here first, or whether it's the story of Indian slave trade as well as Black American slave trade, we discover that our options and our choices are shaped by our knowledge. So knowledge is a good thing, but knowledge alone doesn't cut it. Now, most of the time that I sit around with my fellow Unitarian Universalists and we talk about the problems of the world and we solve them at the bar, the usual solution is more education. People need to be educated more. We need to go out and take those kids to RE class, right? And we're going to indoctrinate our kids, just like the other kids down the street are going to get indoctrinated this morning. I don't think education alone cuts it. When I come to a worship service, what I look for is a little nugget that causes me to examine my faith, my beliefs, my thoughts, and match them against my actions. And there's almost always a gap between what I think is right and what I actually do. We were in London recently, and it was a nice reminder. Every time we got on the train, there was a message that said, mind the gap. It's a nice reminder that not just on Sunday mornings, but throughout the week, there's an opportunity for minding the gap. So I look at the challenge that I face as a UU who has done some study and gained a certain knowledge base, and am here sharing some of that with you, that maybe it's even more my responsibility to step up and to demonstrate what's the right behavior to take. This is where I sort of fall apart, because I don't have an answer to that question. I'm not sure what to do about how my ancestors behaved. The first part of the word reparations is repair, but I can't identify the folk who were affected 8 generations ago by that rich guy who actually owned people and never paid them for the work they did. It's beyond my capacity to find the folk who are descended from that person. Now, maybe come back in 100 years and the genes will be so well documented we can trace back. But at the moment, I've got to deal with a class or a group or a cluster of people that I think were not given a fair head start the way my relatives got a fair head start. So when I got to the affirmative action question, and you've had this, I'm sure, in your other UU programs, affirmative action is not just give everybody an equal chance today. We've got a whole bunch of people that have a 400-year head start, and then we've got a whole bunch of people that are starting at a different spot on the starting line. And if you give them all a fair chance, that's not fair. It's the same story with the Native Americans. And it's not just reparations for the people that were once enslaved in the 17 and the 1800s. And the story of Indian slavery is very poorly told. So a lot of people aren't even aware that we had slave hunters, starting with the Spanish, who sailed along the Atlantic coast, and they weren't hunting for gold and silver. They were hunting for bodies, and they were successful at recruiting them and hauling them away. So we have this challenge of, I've got this backstory where I'm advantaged. I was given a head start, but the other folk who are long gone have their descendants that are with us today. So yesterday we went to the Monacan Ancestral Museum. I highly encourage you to go. It's just north of Amherst, northwest of Amherst. It's a great little place to visit. They do a great job of telling the story of that one particular tribe. They will tell you they've been here for 10,000 years. I will tell you that people have been here for 10, 20,000 years. But as a tribe, I don't think any group has been here for 10,000 years. It's a group of people that were here in the 1700s, and it's an opportunity for us to deal with a particular group of people. But the Monacan heritage is not a heritage with a culture that goes back 10,000 years. It's the descendants of people who got here 10, 20,000 years ago. So that sort of affects my what should I do, besides put a few dollars in the jar when I visit the Monacan Ancestral Museum. How should I deal with the people that are here today, and I'm over here at this level of wealth and status and opportunity, and they're over here at that level. Story I heard yesterday was when they first integrated the schools here in this area. You know, we had black and white schools, segregated schools. What we also had was an Indian school. It was a third level of education. And the blacks would not accept the Indians into their school. The whites would not accept the Indians into their school. The Native Americans in the 1950s were frustrated because they'd built a whole bunch of good black schools in separate but equal in an attempt to get to equal. They didn't invest in the Native American schools. So the 3 different cultures were not necessarily getting along with each other. It wasn't just 2 cultures who didn't get along with each other. When they finally let the Native Americans take the school bus to public school, they made the Native Americans sit in the aisle because none of the people on the school bus would let those Native Americans sit next to them. And the school bus driver wasn't going to drive away with somebody standing. So the poor kids for the first couple of months actually sat in the aisle of the school bus in order to get to school. So maybe education is the answer. And it's nice to see there's some special programs providing affirmative action fellowships and scholarships to the people that are in the Monacan community. You can see that occur in other Native American groups as well. I look at the Supreme Court today, and I don't think we're going to get a lot of very successful legislation getting through the Supreme Court that's based on race. So part of the history is, let's go back to the 1880s and 1890s. How did we set up the black codes, the Jim Crow laws, the segregation laws here in Virginia? Turns out the answer was, even then the Supreme Court would not allow legislation based purely on race. So the technique was, let's establish legislative restrictions based on behavior, geographic location, wealth, not skin color. And so the Supreme Court authorized in Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal, but all of the Jim Crow legislation was really built around, this is a way for us to discriminate against people based on other criteria. We can do the same thing with affirmative action. We can discriminate positively for people based on where do they live. For example, if you live in a county that once grew tobacco, you can benefit from the Tobacco Commission special grant program. If you live in certain census districts, you can benefit from programs built around census district, color-blind programs, programs that are race-blind. But you know the effect is going to be very much balancing out the 400-year head start that other people have gotten. So there is a way for us to get there from here rather than just whine about the problem. So the opportunity that I'm going to throw out to you all is to think through, where do you go with what you know? What do you do with what you know? There was a recent politician who said, let's do something. Let's get down to business. One of the challenges that we can address is, what do we do locally? I'm not going to fix the problem in Ukraine, and I'm not going to fix the problems that exist across the world. But I might have fixed some of the problems in my own neighborhood. I happen to live in a neighborhood in an area where there's a lot more Hispanics than there were 20 years ago. So the challenge and the opportunity in our community is to address people that are maybe like those first colonists speaking Spanish, not as their first language. I don't have many Native Americans remaining in my area that can trace their heritage back to the Dogue and the Manahoac that once lived in my neighborhood. You have a different opportunity down here because you have a state-recognized and federally recognized tribe up with the Monicans. You may not be able to trace back to the Tudelo and the Saponi all that easily, but there is somebody nearby that you can deal with. So I'm actually going to do what teachers do when you really want to make the students think. I'm not going to give you the answer. I'm going to give you the question. And the question is, what do you do with what we know? How do we rebalance what is 400 years of unbalanced behavior, and how do we use what we know going back to 20,000 years to be effective and fair in that rebalancing? So we could talk more at coffee if you want.
The work of this church requires your gifts of time, talent, and dedication. As we collect today's offering, know that your generosity will go towards furthering the work of this and our church, furthering this work and our church's mission to be a force for good in the world.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Linda Wood, and it's my pleasure to represent the Caring Committee this morning. One of the things that the Caring Committee covenants to do with our church is to present on Sunday mornings the joys and concerns that people want to share with everybody as a whole. So if you have something that you would like to be announced on a Sunday morning, you can write it in the Lifelines book, which is on the altar before church and in the alcove next to the name tags during the week. Or you can tell a member of the Caring Committee, or you can call the church office. So into this sacred space, we have a few things to announce this morning. Bonnie Nelson is having her knee replacement surgery on Wednesday, so everybody hold Bonnie in your hearts. Helen Hubler, whose art appears in our sanctuary sometimes, had a heart attack this week. She is recuperating at the Glebe Rehab Services. The Glebe Rehab Center. And one joy, isn't it wonderful to see Greta here today? It's been a long time coming. So we're so glad you're back. If you have something that's in your heart that you would like to express by lighting a candle this morning, now is your chance to come forward.
Find a stillness, hold a stillness, let the stillness carry me. Find a stillness, hold a stillness, let the stillness carry me.
May our prayers be heard and our hearts be restored.
Okay, we have a number of announcements today. If you'll look in your bulletin, you'll see two important announcements. The first one has to do with the Living the Pledge to End Racism workshop. And that's going to be held basically all day on October 26th and November 2nd. And the racial justice team is having a table in the fellowship hall during coffee hour, so you can talk to them about that. And on Sunday, September 29th, we're all going to meet over at Williams Memorial Baptist Church for an interfaith service. So don't come here that day. You'll find yourself worshiping alone. Okay. There are several other announcements that weren't in the bulletin. Let's see here. Today, actually, one of them is today, there will be a democracy circle at 12:30. Is that right, Jeff? Thank you. At 12:30, about the Heritage Foundation's plan to replace senior level civil servants. And I think that'll be very interesting. There also is coming up a presentation on Wednesday evening, September 4th, from 7 to 8 p.m. right here at the church, and that is about disinformation in the digital age. There are flyers out in front, out where you came in, about that, and I think that'll be a very interesting topic, especially when I think about it for myself, how much when people say things and you don't know if it's right or not, and I'm hoping we get some clues about how to negotiate that. I don't have time to do fact-checking on everything that's said, but I hope there are some hints about how to do that. So if you don't know about it, I know Jeff has sent out information to everybody, I guess, but as I say, pick up one of the flyers out there. Another thing that isn't in the bulletin is a workshop on September 8th about understanding gender identity. This will be held at 12:30, right after the service. If you register by September 5th, they'll have a box lunch for you. So you might want to consider doing that. And I think there are also flyers out there about that. Let's see if there's anything else. No, I think I've got them all. Okay.
Is number 318, and it's in your hymnal, which you have, but it's also on the screen. So. as one we pledge ourselves to greater service. With love and justice, strive to make us free.
Our closing words today are also from Reverend Dr. Jan Carlson Bull. She said, "Like many of you, I learned early on a pledge of allegiance that carried far more than loyalty to one nation under God. I learned allegiance to the assumption that this nation was founded by my European forebears just a few centuries ago. I learned that Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. I learned that the Nina Pinta and Santa Maria were worthy of the most vivid hues in my box of crayons. I learned and memorized the really important dates, 1492, 1620, 1776, 1789. I didn't bother asking what my daughter Sarah often refers to as that vital second question. I didn't bother asking or wondering or doubting because I really didn't have to. Once the body of belief begins to crack, once what is held to be historic gospel begins to erode, once any of us becomes privy to another story, another history, another reality, we cling to the familiar only out of a need to be reassured, only out of a penchant to take our cues from loved and respected teachers and preachers and parents and grandparents and touted authorities on this and that, because climbing into a boat guaranteed to rock is just way too scary. But conversations matter. Stories new to us but ancient to others matter. Histories written or recalled across generations from a different lineage matter. A religion that holds faith and doubt in reverent balance matters as we consider in the chalice of religious community what happened and what didn't. A religion that holds faith and doubt in reverent balance and the search for truth in the highest esteem matters mightily as we ponder the formation of our heroes and history. Go into your week in peace, and may the light of the chalice go with you. Amen.